My name is Kelly, and I have an unhealthy obsession with serial killers. Alright, here we go with king-size killers and bite-sized bits. Theodore Robert Bundy. Born in 1946 and became one of the most well-known serial killers out there. He does have some competition, but maybe they can talk about it in the afterlife, who knows. But anyway, this is going to be like a twofold, because I think that given the time that he was active, there was no social media. Of course you had the news outlets, but this was pen and paper. People still out there, going door to door trying to find out certain things. And this was one of the first cases that I know of, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they actually started to use a computer system to track him down, because they did come out with his name, and they did come out with the make and model of the car he was driving. So Koppel, who was the lead investigator on the investigation, decided what if we put in a guy named Ted, who drives a VW Volkswagen, beige in color, and they put it into this computer system that would help them kind of narrow it down a little bit, obviously. And so that's what they did, and so began the hunt for Ted Bundy. He confessed to killing 30 women, but the total is unconfirmed. And he was active from February 1974 to February 1978. He went from California to Colorado, Florida, Idaho, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. So he made his way around, and he was incredibly brutal in his killings. All of the victims had similar look to them. Their hair was parted down the middle. They were brunettes, and he would go around faking an injury to see if anybody would be willing to help him put books in a car, or put a boat or a surfboard, which, how are you going to do that one-handed anyway? But so he had different tactics. And back then, I think people, I think there's been horrible people throughout history, but I don't know if everyone always thought when someone walked up to them at that point, it was going to be, he's going to murder me. I don't really think that's kind of how it was. I think it was a different time. So, this is how he would kind of lure his victims away. And he actually went to Lake Sammamish and picked up 2 different women that day. And that's when they discovered his name was Ted, because he was overheard giving his name. So he would take these women into secluded areas, and he would strangle them and rape them. Sometimes he would decapitate them. Most times he would leave them where he killed them and come back and visit them. He would have sex with their bodies. He would put makeup on them. So he kind of kept them around, so to speak, for as long as he could, and then he would move on. He was violent when he would commit these acts. From everything I've ever read about him, I mean, it was almost like there was just this monster inside of him, that the rage was so overwhelming, and it was incredibly brutal. So he was first arrested and charged with the attempted kidnapping of Cheryl Durange. And when he got her in the car, he mistakenly handcuffed both hands together instead of one to him and one to her. And so she managed to escape. And so, this is what got the ball rolling with that. And he was arrested, and he was found guilty on those charges. Since he was a law student, he had access to the law library, and he was left unattended basically. And so he went out the window and he injured himself going out the window. While he was working on an appeal, he escaped. Wasn't on the run very long. He hopped out of a window and injured himself when he landed, and went up into the mountains for a while. And when he was recaptured, I mean, you could tell he looked like, it was kind of, maybe it was a little bit of relief for him, because he hadn't had anything to eat nor drink, and he was kind of living off the land, so to speak. And eventually he was charged with multiple other murders. So he never pled guilty. He would not plead guilty. He went on the assumption that he was smarter than everybody else in the room, and he acted as his own attorney throughout his trial. He did have legal counsel that would advise him, but he really did not take too much of that advice. They offered him a plea, and he wouldn't take it. So that put the death penalty on the books for him, and he was found guilty. He was found guilty of 30 murders, which included the Chi Omega murders, which one of the sorority sisters actually identified him leaving. And he was just a very scary individual. He grew up, the household he grew up in, I mean, there's no perfect household, but he wasn't mistreated in any way. He just was a strange young man from the beginning. And to learn that his sister is actually his mother was probably a little bit upsetting for him, but isn't an excuse to kind of go off and destroy lives and to wreak havoc around the world. No. There's therapy. Try some, So he had everyone fooled. He was into politics. He had friends who were lawyers. He actually worked at a suicide hotline. And, all of these things. So if you're crafty enough to portray all of these things to the people who are watching, and clever enough to sneak up on those who are not, I mean, it's endless. He could have gone on. So he went on trial in Florida, and he was convicted and sentenced to the electric chair. His second trial commences, and he starts to not eat. So basically what he does is he loses enough weight to get out of the top of his cell, and he goes on the run again. And this is when he hits the Chi Omega house and bludgeons some sorority sisters to death. Not all of them died. I think there were 2 survivors, and then one of them witnessed and identified him at trial as the man that she saw leaving the house. So the last murder that they mention is of Kimberly Leach, and she was 12 years old, and she was walking out of school. And he's never really publicly discussed that murder. From what I've read, and this is just from what I've read, he strangled her as he raped her in the woods. So, that was it. But he, appeared to get emotionally upset when discussing that with the priest, or I think it was a minister that went in to interview him to kind of find out what made him tick, what started all this. And of course he had an excuse for everything, but never once did he take ownership for his own actions. It was always something else, something he read, something he had seen on TV, just things that he had been exposed to. So, he's a narcissist. So he was executed in 1989 in Florida's electric chair. He was actually married while he was on death row, and he fathered a child. And this woman stayed with him until the confession tapes, until he started to confess to the murders in order to prolong his execution. He was hoping the more he came out with, the longer he'd be able to live, and they finally just said, enough is enough. He was suave, he was handsome, he had everything that a woman would be looking for in the 70s. And maybe now, times are different. So maybe instead of, a lawyer, he was a doctor, and he had his own practice. And, you look, there's Dr. Shipman. He was the exact same way. He was a doctor, he had his own practice, and he was a serial killer. but it took him a very long time to get caught. So the thing is things were easy back then. They're easier now because you can be anybody you want on the internet. And that's very scary. So what I kind of had an idea about that is, just having some single friends and just knowing, what goes on. I watch, Dateline, and, I watch these, and I certainly don't sit there with any sort of judgment, because we're all vulnerable. We all have our weaknesses. We all do something at some time with our eyes closed, and we're maybe not all as vigilant as we need to be. But, a lot of times I think that if maybe we would have just paid a little bit more attention and picked up on something that seemed minute or not very important, but every woman has a little voice inside. And it's up to you on whether or not you listen to it. I will listen to mine 9 times out of 10. Usually that 10% is something I really want to do, and I'm like, oh, fine. I know I'm gonna pay for this later with either, having that last cocktail, whatever it may be, spending too much money on a pair of shoes. But the one thing I always pay attention to is my surroundings when my husband, or if I'm not with anyone else. And now with technology these days, you have the internet, you have all these social media outlets, and it can be anybody that's talking to you. It could be, you think is like this doctor from Illinois who's got his own practice and, comes from this wealthy family, and they have all these privileges, and, it ends up being some 50-year-old man living in his mom's basement. You can be anybody you want on the internet. And I don't feel that enough people kind of take the time to think about that. If you're newly single, you're ready to get out there, maybe you're excited, it's a whole new chapter, and if someone sees the picture of you and says, oh, I really like, your hair, or you look really great in this photo, that starts a conversation. So now you're corresponding with this person. Well, thank you so much, that means a lot. You may feel free to go into the experiences that you've just been going through, and they may be very sympathetic and want to lend an ear. And then, the next thing you know, maybe they want to meet you, but it's not going to be out in public. It's not going to be anywhere that maybe you feel safe. But because you've been having all this correspondence with them, you're like, okay, that's fine. And the next thing you know, you end up chained to a radiator. It is just these things that I feel like, if you take the time to really pay attention to what people are saying to you, you can almost read between the lines. I'm not saying that I wouldn't make mistakes if I ended up divorced tomorrow. I'm just saying that I think that, especially for women, sometimes we are so eager for that approval, or it depends on what you're going through. You may need that validation. You may need somebody to tell you that you look really nice. You may need that conversation. But there are so many things out there to be scared of. Sex trafficking. What the hell? I mean, I didn't even know that this was a problem until recently. Like, okay, so I have young women in my life. I mean, what the hell if they go to the mall and I never see them again? They could have just run away, but I'm never going to know that because they could be in Tijuana. Just not knowing. And, you look at Natalie Holloway. Her parents don't know what happened. They're going off of the word of somebody who may or may not have murdered her. Others are saying she was sold into sex slavery. It's a terrifying world. And, if you don't take the time to kind of pay attention to what is going on around you, you may not get another opportunity. And of course, you don't want to spend your life afraid of the Ted Bundys or, the Richard Ramirez or even the Gacy's or anybody. Your next door neighbor, Ed Gein. They have an old guy saying, oh, he was quiet. He was just a quiet old man. Yeah, he was quiet. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. It's just, it's a terrifying day and age, and the only way that you'll get out of it alive is if you just pay attention. I know random stuff happens. You can't avoid that. But think about all of the things that people got away with in the early years, even the 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, you didn't have DNA, you didn't have fingerprinting the way that you do now. Now you can't sneeze in public and somebody not have your DNA. I mean, it's just going to happen. So it is harder to get away with it, but if it's a stranger on stranger activity, it makes it a little easier. I know of two people in my life at this point. One, we have a safe word, and whenever she goes out on a date with somebody new, I will give her a little while, a few hours or so, and I will text this safe word to her. And we have two. One means I'm okay, one means holy hell, help me. I know who she's with. When this is the name she's given me, this is the place she's meeting, this is what this guy supposedly looks like. So I'm down with all that, and she's been very receptive to I watch way too many Dateline shows. But I have somebody else in my life that is not as safe, and there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not there yet. I really don't know. So I guess if I had anything to say, it's just like, pay attention. Because if they can walk up and shake your hand and smile right to your face, what's to say what they'll do to you when your back is turned?